Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our ACLU Office Hours Organizer Edition. My name is Karla Esqueda, and I'm an organizer and I focus in Southern Minnesota. Most of my work is primarily outreach, community education, as well as voter engagement and voter education. And so today we're going to answer a couple of questions that have been sent in to us. My colleague here, Julio, will answer those for us tonight. And we just want to remind you that the Spanish version will start at 5 p.m. Les queremos recordar que la versión en español comenzará a las 5. Do you want to introduce yourself, Julio?
Everybody, excited to be here. Good to see you, Karla. I'm so excited I wore a tie today. So good it is to be on this. So excited to take some calls. My name is Julio, or some questions. My name is Julio Zelaya. Work with Karla. Get the pleasure to work in Southern Minnesota and a lot with our immigrant communities. So as an organizer, work through throughout Southern Minnesota in some of the smaller towns in our state. Get to work with some really amazing people with some conditions, and I think we'll talk about today. But I think as things have changed because of everybody in the whole world's changed. But we continue to work, we continue to organize, and hopefully today we get to tell you a little bit more about how things change and what we're still working on, right? Because there's still there's a lot that's been going on.
That's so true. Thanks, Julio. So we'll start with a couple of questions that we have. So it looks like, people want to know what's the role of a ACLU organizer and what does kind of our day-to-day work look like?
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have a little bit more of a conversation because I know you and I work closely on a lot of these things, and there's other organizers also in Minneapolis doing some great work on our criminal justice reform. Some really great things that are moving, and so you might already know and have seen the work that we've done. But mainly, I think when I talk about my role and really the ability that I get to do what I do. I talk about really leveraging community power. For us within the ACLU, a lot of our work runs through the Constitution and what constitutional rights people have, and a lot of times, unfortunately, how those aren't being upheld. So in Southern Minnesota, it's really unique. In Greater Minnesota, I should say, it's really a unique place in that we get to work through education, through community advocacy, and kind of the last bit of that the ACLU is more famous for is the litigation part of it. So when we talk about education, it's really the ability to bring up some of the issues that to educate ourselves on some of the issues that the community is facing. A lot of my role is to bring up some of the issues that community members have voiced to our legal staff, to our policy, and able to really craft what solutions we think we're able to work through. A lot of it, another part of that is also education for our community, which I know, Karla, you work a lot with our voting rights campaign, and getting people to know what are their constitutional rights, and more importantly, what's the praxis of having constitutional rights, because it's not just enough to have a constitutional rights, but you have to exercise them. And so it's really a pleasure to work with organizations such as the ACLU that gets to work in that bridge of praxis of actually making these constitutional rights come to life. So that education portion is really important to me, really important to the work that we do. But it also it looks sometimes as community, it looks like organizing sometimes in a way that it is advocacy, right? A lot of times we have to advocate because of there's either a timely issue, there's either a reason that we're best situated to advocate, and that means going into city councils, that means going up to the legislature, that means having conversations with elected officials about why something is potentially dangerous and harmful to people and people's civil rights. And lastly, the litigation part of it, I think with the last portion of what this looks like for an organizer that's unique to the ACLU is that, people are affected by the law every day, right? And throughout their lives, they'll come into contact with the law. And I think as organizers, as a Latino, we see that law affects us in a way, in a disproportionate way, right? In a different way, it looks different, it feels different when you talk about things like immigration. When you talk about something as simple as being stopped by the police, right? The law looks, feels, and in fact, the outcome tends to be different, right? And so, being a community organizer is really being able to spot the issues that we see in our community, that we both also are experiencing ourselves, or maybe our family members are feeling, our friends, and being able to bring a litigious part of the ACLU to really be able to leverage some of that legal power that we're entitled to. And so the litigation part, I think, is a really unique part of being an organizer with the ACLU, that we're not only were able to voice some of the issues that we know are facing, not only we're able to think through solutions, but we know that sometimes, some of the answer has to be litigation. And that's been a really powerful tool for us. And I don't know if there's something that you want to add, Karla, to that, because I know that's, for me, that's been a really important part for me to kind of to have in the background.
I would agree. Yes. It's really important for us to keep a pulse on our communities. And I think it's also important to note that we try to keep all marginalized communities in mind when we're working. We know that Southern Minnesota specifically has a lot of immigrant-rich towns, and we like to work and focus in as many of them as we can. So it's important for us to make sure that we're keeping tabs on the different community needs, because not all communities face the same challenges. And it's also really important for us to bring that education piece to communities, to make sure that they're aware of what their constitutional rights are, because a lot of the times, you can't do anything if you don't know that you have a right in the first place. So that's really a lot of our focus. Now it's a little bit different in the time of COVID. We're moving a lot more online, which is different for me, and it has changed my day-to-day. I'm sure yours as well. We're used to going out to all these different towns on a regular basis and connecting with community. So now we're kind of just shifting gears and trying to engage with community more on an online basis. So that is kind of what kind of goes into the next questions, and what are the challenges of organizing in Greater Minnesota. I don't know if you want to add any particular challenges that you're currently facing.
Well, yeah, I think we were actually uniquely situated as well situated as rural organizers, in that we have to, like you said, Karla, travel to, we have to sometimes go from Rochester to Worthington in one day. And it's the ability to span geographically where issues are coming up is something that actually pushed us to be more flexible. So actually organizing on online, through the phone, is something that we've been doing, that we were actually doing before. And I think the transition has been pretty, at least I feel, has been pretty smooth, because so many times to connect with people who are far away from our work, we needed to do that work prior to COVID. So I think the ACLU organizing has been, I think we've been kind of ready for something like this. Now it's a little different, right? Because we can't be connecting with our communities. We can't be entering the spaces of government that we used to before in the same way. But I think the challenge for us has been that we've expressed that rural communities face, are going to face a lack of voice, a lack of representation, and especially for new communities, immigrant communities, communities of color, there is a sense of social, legal isolation that is unique in every town, right? And every community. The isolation with that, we really see is that sometimes there's a lack of oversight for legal actors, right? For people functioning under the color of law. We see this because, some of the cases that have originated for the ACLU have been in some of the most isolated towns, because people functioning under the color of law simply don't have the same oversight that you would see in places like the metro, right? Don't have maybe the same, our people don't have the same support that they would have and same resources. So that, that still remains the same right now in the time of COVID. We're trying to organize. There's some brilliant and amazing organizing. Then there's shout out to places of Worthington, Faribault. That's really important. I support the other fellow organizers doing that work. But I think some of the things remain. They're just being amplified now. The lack of voice, the lack of oversight and accountability, still something. And it's the reason I think it's so important to remain true to the places and really be active in all parts of the state.
So we do have some immigrant rights questions that we have, and so we'll try to answer them and address them as best as we can. So we have some people kind of wondering, as far as immigrants in particular being blocked from the CARES Act package and being able to kind of access funds during the coronavirus, and just causing a lot of economic hardship for immigrants. And kind of looks like what actions are we currently taking to address that?
Yeah, no, thanks for that, and appreciate that question, because that's kind of been burning at the back of a lot of the work at the immigration waterfront. It's been something that a lot of people don't know that. For example, like you mentioned, the CARE Act. There's a huge gap in the people who are going to be receiving benefits and people who are not, right? So, for example, we've talked about this in a few cities, that elected officials should be aware that if you're, for example, in a household with mixed status, you probably are not eligible for something like the CARE Act funds. And so many things actually require you to have citizenship. So a lot of non-citizens who are in really need of these crisis packages, this crisis aid, are not going to have access to it. And we're going to really, if there's not action to be done if there's nothing to be, if nothing happens to help our community that is non-citizen, we're going to see a creation of a subclass of people. Especially, so I'm going to refer back to southern Minnesota and rural Minnesota. There's going to be a class of people who are not going to have access to things like rental help for food, simple things as the real basic things that will only perpetuate the crisis even more. So we need to be aware that there's people who are not going to have access to this. Are vital. It's not just a stimulus package. The vital is something that's vital, right? And so actually, I give a shout out to organizations that have been doing some of this work right now at the legislature. We just wrote testimony for a new bill that's coming across. That's going to be that's really looking to create a community emergency fund for people to really fill that gap of people who are receiving benefits or not. Want to be aware that there's a bar from people to access a lot of these funds. And so this bill right now that's being introduced in the Senate is going to be in support of creating a fund which will make it more which will give people more access to emergency, really needed funds. So look for that as it comes through.
Great, thanks. We also have a question coming in from Facebook. We've been hearing a lot of meatpacking plants really all across the country being affected by the coronavirus and the workers, being exposed. And this has happened already in Minnesota in several plants. And so the question's really asking about, if we're doing anything to support the workers of these plants.
Yeah, this is really, so if you don't know this background, especially in southern Minnesota, there's been a lot of attention brought to this, that communities such as Worthington, St. James, Wyndham, Faribault, Rochester, Austin, you see all these smaller towns that are going to be that have had historically in the past 2 decades have had an influx of immigrant, especially Latin immigrants coming into these towns, which now have turned places like St. James, for example, the elementary school, that's 50% kids of Latin descent, right? But it's really changed these small towns to be really diverse. But a lot of it was pulled because of these meatpacking plants that exist in some of the more rural places in the state. And so now what we're seeing, right, is that the same people who have been, we've been talking about inequalities in these towns for years. Now we're seeing that they are the ones who are being exposed and highly exposed. So we see the testing going on in places like Worthington, these high elevated numbers of confirmed cases. And we've been closely talking to city officials, keeping really close tabs on what the local efforts are going to be to keep them. There's some brilliant organizing done by Nidos. Just out to Jessica, who's doing some great work down there, making sure that people get tested down there. I'll bring light that there was just some litigation going on in Missouri that could have been impacted. Unfortunately, it was dismissed. But we're going to be continue to keep talking to community members and see what ways that we're able to really take our name, our brand, and really help out the communities that we're in. Because after all, these are the same people that we've been talking to for that we've been communicating, working with for as long as I've worked here. But these are the people who are mostly who are vulnerable to civil rights violations, and it's the reason that we're in the places that we organize.
And in following up with that, it looks like we have a question again from Facebook wondering, is there anything that the general public can do to help support the employees in Greater Minnesota that are working in these plants?
So many of these, and listen, my mother actually worked for Smithfield in St. James for 23 years, right? So like that's a place that I know very well. So this is very near and dear to my heart. And we know that a lot of them are non-citizens, residents, or another status that are not. These are the same people that are not going to be able to receive these benefits as much either. They're also the base for a lot of these communities, right? And so there's multiple funds happening right now, that people could donate to. We'll throw a link out to some of these because these are really beneficial. But we also want to make sure that people are writing stories that if they believe that their rights are being violated, whether that be for labor law, whether that be their constitutional laws, want to make sure that people are writing what's going on. Also want to make sure that that local officials are also aware that they're in a unique place to be giving support to these communities. So again, make sure that people are looking for any violations that might happen and being able to track those closely, but also being able to give to the funds that are being created. Those are kind of the two things that I would say are most important right now.
And then for our final question tonight, people are wondering what we're doing, what the ACLU is doing in the fight to release immigrants from detention, prisons, and jails currently in Minnesota.
Yeah, so I won't take too long on that because I think our legal team addressed that a little bit last week. But I will highlight some of the work that we're doing in our organizing, especially as it pertains to your county officials. Now, we may have heard of like places like Sherburne that are detaining people, and that's part of it. But also we know that places like Candy, Ojai, Freeborn, Nobles, Carver County, all these counties are places where immigrants are being held, right? And so if you are one of the people watching this right now, and you live in one of these counties, again, Carver, Noble, Freeborn, Candy, Ojai, and Sherburne, be aware that this sheriff, the one who runs these counties, are in charge of these facilities and are in charge and are kind of the overseers of the people being held there, right? And we we've sent out an executive or a model executive order for the governor to try to reduce the amount of people being held in our state jails. We also are asking our sheriffs, and we have a call to action right now, that people should be calling the sheriffs right now, asking them to release people and not bring in more people into their jails, into our local jails. Being that the COVID will spread like wildfire in places like detention centers, we shouldn't be we shouldn't be working to get more people in jail. In fact, we should be working to get people out. And the sheriff is a big part of that conversation. So if you live in one of those counties, we have a call to action right now that you can be doing to call our sheriffs. Again, I'm gonna say it again: Carver, Nobles, Freeborn, Candy, Ojai, and Sherburne County. Call the sheriff, really keeping tabs on who's coming in, who's coming out, and asking them to limit immigration detention.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight. This is going to be part of a weekly series, so we want to make sure that you're tuning in next week for the next version of Office Hours here at the ACLU. And we will put the links that Julio mentioned in the information box in case you wanted to keep updated, and we'll start the Spanish version of the Office Hours soon. So regresamos en español.
All right, thanks.